My obscure religious upbringing as a Protestant Catholic seems like an oxymoron. Either that, or I'm an ecumenicist. Either way, it gave me the opportunity to question a lot of what I was told growing up in regard to man-made religious organizations. My old man, or my dad, was for the Protestant, and my mother was the Catholic. The crazy thing about that mix was my grandmother's spite of the whole matter. See, she had a gripe with the Catholic Church in that they harbored her eldest daughter. At the age of 15 or 16 years old, she fell in love and was ready to get married, but wasn't of age. So they were willing to harbor my aunt while she continued to date her Catholic boyfriend. Well, my grandmother, she married a Protestant. The Scott Presbytery, I'm assuming, could be another. My uncle said that she would cross the street if she saw a priest, just for the sake of argument. And with that, and her preoccupation of losing her first daughter to be wed to a Roman Catholic, all three of her sons went on to marry Roman Catholic girls. So if that isn't bringing something upon yourself by dwelling on it a little bit too much, I don't know what else or how else to explain it. So my grandparents on my mother's side, the Roman Catholic side, sponsored or put up the funds for us to go to Catholic private school. This was in an upper middle class resort town, lake resort sort of property, just outside the Twin Cities during the 70s. From my experience, my mother was quite the spiritualist, as a lot of Roman Catholics tend to be, and can be, superstitious, to say the very least. The biggest difference that I discovered was in the 10 Commandments that both groups tend to adhere by. Commandments that were given to the Jews, or the Yahos, the Jews, the Hebrews, the Israelites. Not to the pagan nations. They were never commanded to follow the 10 Commandments. But it's interesting to see that there are two separate 10 Commandment lists. Depending on how you look at them, you can easily determine whether it was a Catholic list of the 10 Commandments or a Protestant list of the 10 Commandments, simply by looking at the first commandment. In the Roman Catholic list of 10 Commandments, they remove the first, "Thou shalt not have any other mighty ones or gods before you." They remove that and split the "Thou shalt not covet your neighbor's goods or his wife" into two separate commandments in order to make up for the 10. Whereas the Protestant 10 Commandment list has that included within it. The reason for this is that there's a lot of kneeling and obeisance given to inanimate objects within the church building. Genuflecting, making the sign of the cross, and giving obeisance to the Eucharist when the red candle is lit in the chamber. That's from the priest summoning Almighty, or one of the lesser mighty ones, out of heaven into the Eucharist bread. Well, needless to say, I learned a fair amount just going to Bible-based or so-called Bible-based churches that my folks would go to. And because my mom was quite the spiritualist, she tended or leaned toward the charismatic movement. So we went to a lot of churches that tended to believe in the gifts of the pure spirit being active nowadays. I discovered later that that isn't quite the case. We'll cover that in another discussion. So I got into a lot of debates and questioning in my religion class when I went to the Catholic school. Also during that time in the 70s, there were there was two primary Christian, or so-called labeled Christian, comic books, Chick Comics and Spire Comics. Chick Publications began a story or series line about Alberto, a Roman Catholic priest who was native to the country of Spain. Well, needless to say, this was a blatant attack on people's religious beliefs. So they eased out of the booksellers and were removed due to their offensive tendencies. But these comics led me to Alexander Hislop's book, The Two Babylons, a very controversial book. But the fact remains that it exposes a lot of pagan practices that you do find in the Roman Catholic Church. After all, they are seeking for multiple mighty ones. So I ended up refusing to be confirmed as a Catholic. Well, that put a little twist on things, in that I was the eldest of 5 siblings, and we all went to that private Catholic school. Well, we started looking around for a private school to go to, hopping around local areas and nearby towns. It was quite reminiscent of all the church hopping that my folks did, going from one man-made religious organization to another. One of the most valuable things that I learned in hearing all this preaching from so-called Bible-based churches was that the reason you bring your Bible to church is so that you know the man up front isn't lying to you. I took this to heart, and I continued to question doctrine. And I continued with the church hopping just like my folks did. What I found was that most members of most mainstream doctrinal churches or religious sects came from families that believed or attended that very same religious organization. This is why the Master said, if you're not willing to forsake father, mother, or brother or sister, you're not worthy to follow after me. Because a lot of true doctrine, or biblical doctrine, is contradicted by many of these mainstream man-made religious organizations or church groups. The other thing that I noticed about all these different church groups was how each one had a vital truth or hanging point to their mainstream doctrine. But there's an old Hebrew proverb that says half the truth is a whole lie. And if you beat one aspect to death without observing the sum of the truth, then you're more or less become a cult group. While at the same time, many of these groups have singular truths that can be summed up and put together to get a better overall picture of why I no longer belong to a 503c or nonprofit organization, sanctioned by the state, and given special privileges in regard to paying taxes, whereas in the early church, they shared amongst each other and provided for one another, as each other had needs, and others had abundance. They met from house to house, and shared meals together, something that would be nice to see nowadays, rather than just picking up your Bible on Sunday for the sake of bringing it to church. So there you have it, my obscure religious background as a Protestant Catholic. Neither party to either denominational sect, nor an ecumenicist, bringing it all together. After all, you cannot reform a corrupt system, nor can this world be friends with Almighty. Until next time, be encouraged, be of good cheer, and endure till the end.